You're listening to the Valley Current.
So, if you were setting off fireworks or, buying sparklers or preparing a massive barbecue for the 4th of July, you are actually officially celebrating on the wrong day.
Yeah, you really are. It's kind of a historical open secret.
Right, because the real Independence Day, the day the actual monumental decision was made, was July 2nd. And the founders absolutely knew it.
They did.
Anyway, the semi-quincentennial, which is a mouthful, the 250th anniversary of the United States.
It's a huge milestone.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we are looking at this brilliant special anniversary newsletter from the Entrepreneurial Law Group,
which is titled Happy 250th Birthday.
Right. And our mission today is to look at the founding of America, not as, some dusty historical event trapped in an oil painting, but as the ultimate first principles startup launch.
Which is a completely different way to understand history. I mean, when you really get down to it.
So it changes everything.
It does. Because when you strip away the powdered wigs, the parchment, all the mythology we've built up over 2.5 centuries, you are looking at a group of people trying to launch a profoundly disruptive enterprise.
Against an entrenched global monopoly.
Exactly. And they were doing it with almost no resources, facing literal existential risk.
Because the source material offers this perfect, explain it like I'm 5, analogy that really sets the stage. And I want to just lean into it for a second.
It's a great analogy.
It really is. So imagine you have 13 kids who all share the exact same babysitter.
Okay.
Now, this babysitter lives far away, like across the ocean. They're incredibly bossy. They keep taking the kids' allowance without asking.
The taxes.
Right, the taxes. They completely refuse to let the kids make their own house rules. And they even go so far as to send armed guards to literally stand inside the kids' bedrooms.
Which is, a completely untenable living situation.
Yeah.
It's a complete breakdown of the social contract between the governed and the governing.
Right. So eventually, the kids finally snap. They write one massive letter. And this letter does 3 very specific things. First, it states a fundamental rule: everybody is born equal and gets certain rights that nobody can take away.
They're axioms.
Exactly. Second, it provides a very long, very specific receipt of all the terrible things the babysitter did to violate that rule.
A massive list of grievances.
Yep. And third, it concludes that because of all this, the kids are officially in charge of themselves now. They print hundreds of copies, mail them out to the neighborhood, and boom, it's official.
It sounds so simple when you put it like that.
It does. But when you look at the timeline and the source, this wasn't just a spontaneous letter written in a fit of rage one afternoon.
Oh, not at all. What the analysis lays out is a 14-month-long product launch.
14 months.
Yeah. We are talking about a grueling process that involved physical combat, capturing enemy ships in the freezing Atlantic, absolutely brutal peer review copy editing.
We're going to get to that copy editing. It's wild.
It really is. It left the primary author absolutely seething. And it created a paper trail so enduring that it's still generating multi-million-dollar discoveries literally yesterday.
But wait, let me stop you right there. Because if we are calling this a startup launch, the timing of the launch announcement makes no sense to me.
How so?
Well, we celebrate on the 4th of July. But nobody woke up on July 4th, 1776, and just decided to found a country on a whim.
They absolutely did not. By the time the Second Continental Congress actually adopted the Declaration of Independence, the colonies had already been at war with Britain for 15 months.
15 months?
Yes. The shooting started at Lexington and Concord way back in April 1775.
Wow.
So for over a year, you have open, bloody warfare. You have armies marching, cannons firing, people dying.
Right.
The Declaration wasn't the beginning of the fight. It was effectively a press release for a decision that had already been made on the battlefield.
That is such a wild framing.
Yeah.
A press release for a battlefield decision.
But that's exactly what it was. It was a formal announcement to the world of a separation that was already well underway.
But if you have people already shooting at each other for over a year, why do you even need the paperwork?
What do you mean?
I mean, why do you need a piece of paper to tell the British Army who you are currently shooting at that you don't want to be governed by them anymore? I feel like the bullets send a pretty clear message.
They do, but it's about the international audience and the internal stakeholders.
Okay.
You can't just be a rebellion. You have to legitimize yourself as a sovereign nation to get foreign aid, specifically from France.
Oh, right. You need investor capital.
Exactly. And internally, you have to formally commit all 13 distinct colonies to a single, irrevocable path. You need the paperwork to align those stakeholders.
Which brings us to the quote-unquote board of directors making the actual decision.
The Continental Congress.
Right. If July 4th is just the date on the press release, when did the board actually vote to pivot the company?
So the formal push started on June 7, 1776.
A month earlier.
Almost. Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution in Congress. He explicitly moved that the colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states.
Okay.
But here's where Congress acted exactly like a prudent corporate board. They were staring down a massive, irreversible decision, and they just weren't ready to vote.
I don't get that.
Yeah.
If they're already in a state of war, what is the holdup? What are they waiting for?
They were waiting for explicit authorization.
From who?
From their constituents. Several delegations, including massive heavy hitters, geographically and economically, like New York and Pennsylvania, didn't have instructions from their home colonies to vote for independence yet.
Oh, I see.
Think about the mechanics of the 18th century. You can't just send an email to your constituents to poll them.
Right, there's no Slack channel for the 13 colonies.
Exactly. To get instructions, delegates had to send riders on horseback hundreds of miles back to their colonial assemblies.
Which takes days.
Days or weeks. And then those assemblies had to debate the issue, vote, and then send a rider all the way back to Philadelphia. You cannot pass a resolution of that magnitude, which is literally committing treason against the crown, without your stakeholders explicitly on board.
So it's this massive logistical and political bottleneck.
Precisely. So Congress tabled the vote on independence until July 1st to give delegates time to get that authorization from home.
But they didn't just go on vacation, right?
No, they didn't pause operations. They appointed a committee to draft the public announcement in the meantime, just so the paperwork would be ready to ship if and when the deal actually closed.
Okay, so the debate finally resumes on July 1st.
Yes.
They take a trial vote, and the source material points out it was actually split. 9 colonies were in favor.
But 9 out of 13 isn't the unanimity you need to launch a new nation.
Right, you can't have a fractured founding.
You need a unified front, otherwise the British will just pick the colonies off one by one.
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. But overnight, intense political maneuvering happens. By the very next day, July 2nd, the Lee resolution was officially adopted, 12-0.
Wait, 12-0? What about the 13th?
New York abstained because they were still waiting on those sluggish instructions from horseback riders.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But still, it passes.
It passes. So legally speaking, July 2nd is the day independence actually happened. The United States became an independent entity on July 2nd.
And John Adams knew it.
He was certain of it.
The source mentions he was absolutely convinced that July 2nd would go down as the most important date in history.
He wrote this famous letter to his wife, Abigail.
Yeah, predicting that the 2nd of July would be celebrated by succeeding generations as the Great Anniversary Festival.
Complete with parades, shows, and illuminations. He was entirely confident in that.
And he was completely wrong about the date that history would actually remember.
He was off by 2 days.
It is exactly like a modern tech company.
How so?
Well, imagine a major tech giant's board of directors secretly votes on a Tuesday afternoon to pivot the entire company, abandon their core business, and launch a revolutionary new product. That closed-door vote on Tuesday is the real moment of change. That's July 2nd.
Right.
But they don't hold the flashy keynote presentation with the massive screens, the lights, and the press until Thursday. The market, the users, the public, they only ever remember Thursday.
That makes perfect sense.
They remember the date on the packaging, the date of the launch announcement. They don't care about the date the board signed the corporate resolution.
The market remembers the launch announcement. And it forces you to ask a really interesting question about how human memory works at scale.
Yeah.
How do history, voters, and markets assign credit? Do we reward the actual brave decision made in a tense, sweltering room?
On July 2nd?
Right. Or do we reward the beautiful packaging and distribution of that decision?
The history of the 4th of July suggests we heavily favor the packaging.
We absolutely do.
But to get that packaging right, Congress needed a product team. Since they tabled the actual vote back in early June, they had to assign the drafting to a committee so the document would be ready for July. This leads us directly to the cap table of this startup. And honestly, this is one of the messiest editing processes I have ever heard of.
You're talking about the famous Committee of Five, appointed on June 11, 1776.
Yes, who's on it again?
You have Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston.
What's fascinating is the breakdown of their roles and their ages.
That's quite a spread.
Benjamin Franklin was the elder statesman at 70, providing the editorial polish and the gravitas.
Right.
John Adams was 40, and he was the chief advocate on the floor of Congress, the guy whipping the votes.
He was the driver.
But the principal author, the guy who actually had to sit down in a rented room and write the working draft of a new nation in about 17 days.
Thomas Jefferson.
And he was only 33 years old.
Yes.
In context of a room full of seasoned politicians and a 70-year-old titan like Franklin, Jefferson is practically the intern of the group.
It is a remarkable dynamic. Adams later recalled the exact conversation where they decided who would draft it. Yeah, Adams explicitly told Jefferson to write it because Adams felt he himself was too obnoxious, suspected, and unpopular.
Why? Self-aware.
Very. And he felt Jefferson had a reputation for brilliant writing. So Jefferson retreats to his rented second-floor rooms.
And he had a special desk, right?
He did. He even works on a portable wooden writing desk that he designed himself to get this done.
A 33-year-old sitting on a custom lap desk, sprinting to write the foundational document of a new country in 2.5 weeks.
It's a lot of pressure.
It is. And yet, Jefferson himself later admitted that the document wasn't even meant to be wholly original, right?
Yeah.
I always assumed he was just sitting there having these massive philosophical epiphanies.
No, and that's a crucial point. Jefferson insisted the goal was never to invent new principles out of thin air.
Oh.
He explicitly wanted it to be an expression of the American mind.
An expression of the American mind.
Yes. He was pulling heavily from ideas that were already in the air, like his own preamble to the Virginia Constitution, George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, and the natural rights philosophy of John Locke.
So it was like a massive curation project.
Exactly. His genius wasn't invention, it was synthesis. He was taking the cultural and political zeitgeist and distilling it into a single, highly readable, punchy document.
Okay, so he finishes the draft, he hands it in to the committee. Franklin and Adams make some light edits.
Yes, the initial review.
And the source notes, it is somewhat contested, but Franklin is traditionally credited with a massive editorial save here.
Oh, definitely.
Jefferson originally wrote sacred and undeniable truths, and Franklin sharpened it into the iconic self-evident truths.
Which completely shifts the tone.
It really does.
Sacred and undeniable sounds religious and defensive.
Like you're daring someone to argue with you.
Exactly. But self-evident sounds like an unassailable law of physics. It's just a fact. It's a brilliant edit.
But the real pain for Jefferson hadn't even started yet.
Not even close.
Because on July 2nd, after the independence vote actually passed, the entire Congress took over as the ultimate brutal copy editor.
I want every writer listening to this to just brace themselves.
Truly. How does a room of dozens of politicians actually edit a document together in 1776? There's no Google Docs.
No, there isn't. Congress sat as a committee of the whole.
Okay.
They basically read the document line by line, debating the wording, crossing things out, and changing phrasing on the fly for 2 entire days.
2 days of line edits with 50 people.
From July 2nd to July 4th, Jefferson sat there in the room, reportedly squirming in silent agony as they just ripped his draft apart.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. Franklin, sitting next to him, actually tried to console a devastated Jefferson by telling him a story about a hat maker.
What was the story? I love this part.
So Franklin says he knew a hat maker who was opening a shop. The hat maker had this beautiful, long, descriptive sign painted for a storefront.
Okay.
But before he hung it up, he showed it to his friends for feedback. One friend said a word was redundant, so they cut it.
Classic.
Another friend said a phrase was unnecessary, so they cut that. Piece by piece, the sign was edited down to almost nothing.
Just completely redlined.
Exactly. Just his name and a picture of a hat.
That is the most painful, relatable, creative experience ever. Congress ended up cutting roughly 25% of Jefferson's text.
A full quarter of it.
A quarter of the product was just left on the cutting room floor because of committee consensus. But we have to talk about the specific edit that hurt the most, historically speaking.
Yes, we do.
Because it wasn't just stylistic tweaking.
No. We need to look objectively at what the source material points out as the deepest, most systemic contradiction of this founding document.
Right.
The largest single deletion from Jefferson's draft was a furious, passionate paragraph condemning the transatlantic slave trade.
Jefferson actually wrote that.
He did. He had written that this trade was a cruel war against human nature itself.
Hold on, but that paragraph got struck from the final record completely. Why? If they are laying out a first principles argument about human equality, why would they delete the paragraph attacking the slave trade?
Well, according to Jefferson's own notes from the room, it was removed at the absolute insistence of the delegations from South Carolina and Georgia.
Because of their economies.
Exactly. They relied entirely on enslaved labor for their plantation economies. But it wasn't just the South.
Oh, really?
Jefferson also noted that some northern delegations were sensitive to the deletion because their own merchants had a very lucrative role in the shipping and financing side of the transatlantic trade.
Wow.
The analysis in the source material is quite stark here, and we have to report it exactly as they frame it in the newsletter. This massive compromise was made to protect the fragile coalition of the startup.
They needed the votes.
They needed unanimous support from all 13 colonies to launch. If they kept the condemnation of slavery, South Carolina and Georgia walk, the coalition shatters and the revolution fails before it starts.
But in making that compromise,
they planted a fatal contradiction directly into the foundational code of the country.
it is an overwhelming paradox. You have the words, "all men are created equal," written by a man who actively enslaved people.
Jefferson.
Right, and then edited by a committee to explicitly protect the institution of slavery just to get the votes to pass it. The red lines of the original draft literally show this contradiction cemented from day one.
Precisely. And as the analysis points out, it would take another 89 years and a catastrophic, bloody civil war to even begin resolving that fundamental flaw.
That's a heavy technical debt.
It is a stark reminder that the founding wasn't pristine or inevitable. It was a deeply negotiated, flawed consensus.
It really forces you to ask a terrifying question about the nature of compromise.
How so?
Well, when you are launching anything, a business, a movement, a massive project, when it compromise the absolute necessary price of getting the thing off the ground.
Right.
And when does that compromise create a fatal flaw, a technical debt in your core code that is guaranteed to compound and eventually tear the whole system apart?
It's the central tension of any structural creation.
Yeah.
But for Congress in 1776, they had a launch date to hit.
They couldn't debate forever.
No. The British fleet was literally massing off the coast of New York at that very moment.
The ultimate ticking clock.
Exactly. So by July 4th, the edits were done, the compromise document was formally adopted, and they had to actually ship version 1.0 to the users.
Shipping the product. This is where the physical logistics become fascinating to me.
It's a huge operation.
Right. So they send the approved, heavily edited text down the street to a printer named John Dunlap on the night of July 4th.
And Dunlap works overnight.
He prints about 200 broadsides, just big single-sheet posters. And this is where the source material completely dismantles some of my favorite childhood trivia about how this all went down.
The signature myths.
Yes.
We have built an incredible mythology around the physical signing of this document.
I always pictured July 4th as this incredibly dramatic, quiet day where all 56 delegates line up in a neat row in a sunlit room.
The beautiful feather pen.
Exactly. And they sign this massive piece of parchment while nodding solemnly at each other.
Pure myth.
It shatters my illusions.
Mostly driven by famous 19th century paintings that wanted to compress the entire historical process into one visual moment.
For dramatic effect.
Right. The reality is that the beautiful and engrossed parchment, the one with the gorgeous calligraphy you see in the National Archives today, didn't even exist on July 4th.
Wait. It didn't exist.
No. Engrossing means writing a document out in a formal, large legal hand on animal skin parchment.
Okay.
That process takes time. Congress didn't even order the document to be engrossed until July 19th.
2 weeks later.
And it wasn't signed by most delegates until August 2nd. A full month later.
So July 4th wasn't a signing party at all?
Not at all. And even on August 2nd, not everyone was in the room. Some delegates signed weeks or months later as they cycled in and out of Philadelphia.
Okay, but what about John Hancock? The story goes he wrote his name incredibly large right in the center so that King George could read it without his spectacles.
Speculation and later embellishment, according to the sources.
Oh, come on. That's such a good story.
It makes for a great story of defiance, but there is absolutely no contemporary evidence he ever said that.
Then why is his signature so huge?
He signed it large because he was the president of the Congress, so he signed first and centered his name. It was just standard protocol for his position.
And what about Benjamin Franklin's famous quip?
Which one?
The one where he supposedly turns to the room and says, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately."
Also heavily contested.
Seriously, everything is a lie.
That quote was only attributed to him decades after the fact. It sounds exactly like the kind of witty, morbid wordplay Franklin was known for.
Right, which is why it's so believable.
Which is why it's stuck in the cultural memory, but we cannot definitively prove he said it in that room on that day.
It's amazing how much we've mythologized the packaging of the event rather than the event itself.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture of how information actually scaled in the 18th century, the reality is far more interesting than the myth.
Tell me about the scaling.
Well, Dunlap's 200 broadsides, printed overnight on July 4th, were essentially the master copies.
Okay.
They weren't meant for framing. They were functional tools. They were given to post riders, men on horseback, who would ride exhaustingly long relays, changing horses every 15 or 20 miles.
To physically carry the text to the different colonies.
Exactly, and to the Continental Army.
And the physical reaction to the text was immediate.
As explosive.
We know George Washington had it read aloud to his troops in New York on July 9th.
Yes.
And the crowd in New York got so fired up by the language that they marched down to Bowling Green, threw ropes around a massive gilded lead statue of King George III on horseback.
And they toppled it.
And chopped it into pieces to melt down into 42,000 musket balls to shoot at the British.
That is the ultimate user engagement.
Right. You read the press release and immediately manufacture ammunition out of the incumbent's branding. It's incredible.
It is. But the key to the widespread distribution was decentralized printing.
How so?
As those Dunlap master copies reached different regions via the postwriters, local printers in those towns would set the text anew on their own presses.
Oh, to distribute it to their local market.
Exactly. It wasn't one central factory pumping out all the copies. It was a decentralized network generating local versions of version 1.0.
Which is so much faster.
And that specific mechanism, the local reprinting, directly sets up the most exciting cinematic part of this entire deep dive.
The London birthday surprise.
Yes.
This just happened. Literally yesterday, July 2nd, 2026. The UK National Archives unveiled a newly discovered original copy of the Declaration of Independence.
It's a massive find.
It is one of only 11 known surviving copies of a specific local printing done in Exeter, New Hampshire, between July 16th and 19th of 1776.
And crucially, it is the only known Exeter copy located outside of the United States.
The provenance of this document, how it got from a wooden printing press in New Hampshire to a filing cabinet in London where it sat for 250 years, reads like a maritime thriller.
It really does. Let's trace this paper trail.
Let's do it.
So, the local printer in Exeter, a guy named Robert Louis Fowle, prints this broadside in mid-July. Archivists infer that a man named Captain Eleazer Johnson likely bought a copy in nearby Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Right. And Captain Johnson wasn't just a merchant or a fisherman. He was the commander of an American privateer called the Dalton.
Now, a privateer was essentially a privately owned warship commissioned by the new American government to go out and raid British commerce.
It's essentially state-sanctioned piracy to disrupt the British supply chain, right? It's a startup in itself. You get investors to buy a ship, you get a letter of marque from the government making it legal, you go capture British cargo, and you split the profits.
Exactly. It was incredibly dangerous, but highly lucrative. So in November 1776, Captain Johnson sails the Dalton out of Portsmouth, heading across the Atlantic for European waters.
But the cruise does not last long.
No, it doesn't.
On Christmas Eve, 1776, in the freezing waters off the coast of Cape Finisterre in northwest Spain, the Dalton runs into massive trouble.
I want to picture this. It's December 24th, the North Atlantic. It is freezing. The water is treacherous, and emerging from the horizon is not a merchant ship they can raid.
It's the absolute last thing they want to see.
They are intercepted and captured by the HMS Reasonable, a massive British Royal Navy warship commanded by Captain Thomas Fitzherbert.
The Dalton is totally outgunned.
Completely outmatched. It is a historic capture in itself because the Dalton was the first American privateer taken in European waters during the war.
Imagine the sheer terror of that scene. The British board the American ship, they seize the vessel, they take the entire crew prisoner.
And remember, to the British, these aren't enemy combatants in a recognized army.
Right, these are traitors and pirates who could easily be hanged.
Exactly. And during the search of the captain's cabin, they seize all of Captain Johnson's papers.
And what's in there?
Bundled together with the ship's rules of engagement and a privateering commission personally signed by John Hancock is this folded-up Exeter broadside of the Declaration of Independence.
Wow. So the British captain just bags it up as evidence.
Yes. Captain Fitzherbert gathers all these captured documents and forwards them to the Admiralty in London as military intelligence.
It's the status report.
He essentially says, here is the proof of what these rebels are doing and the authority they claim to be acting under.
So it goes to London.
The British clerks in London receive it, file it away in a cabinet, and the document essentially goes to sleep for a quarter of a millennium.
Just sitting in the dark while the entire modern world is built.
Untouched.
Until May of this year, 2026. Enter Michael Skur.
Yes.
The source describes him as a retired insurance executive who has spent 11 years of Thursday mornings volunteering as a cataloger at the National Archives in London.
11 years of Thursdays just looking through old boxes.
His dedication is astounding, and it speaks to the unsung heroes of historical preservation.
It really does. He was working on a specific project cataloging the correspondence of Royal Navy captains from the Revolutionary era.
Just routine archiving.
Exactly. He's looking through Captain Fitzherbert's letters from 1776, sees a reference to enclosures, and finds a document simply listed in the old archival logs as another paper.
Another paper. The understatement of the century.
Honestly.
So he unfolds this 250-year-old piece of paper, and across the top, he sees the word Declaration.
It must have been a heart-stopping moment.
It's incredible. It's like finding an original birthday card from your great-great-great-great-grandparents, still in the envelope, completely pristine, just in time for the 250th party.
That's exactly what it is.
But it raises a huge logical question for me.
What's that?
Why would a warship captain carry this giant piece of paper to sea? It's not a navigation map. It's not tradable cargo. Space on a ship is incredibly tight. Why bring the press release?
It's a fantastic question, and Amanda Bevan, who heads the Archive's Royal Navy Correspondence Project, offers a truly evocative theory that makes perfect sense.
Let's hear it.
She notes that it was customary for a privateer captain to read his official commission aloud to the crew to establish his authority and to explain the legal parameters of what they were doing.
Makes sense.
She believes Captain Johnson likely read the Declaration of Independence alongside that commission.
Wait, read it to the crew while they're out at sea.
Think about the psychology of the crew. You are asking these sailors to commit high treason against the greatest naval power on Earth.
Right.
If they are caught, the legal distinction between being treated as a prisoner of war and being hanged as a pirate relies entirely on the legitimacy of the government that sent them.
So they needed to know it was real.
You need them to understand that they aren't just pirates plundering for gold. They're fighting for a massive structural cause.
Wow.
On this theory, the Declaration wasn't just a piece of news they had heard about. It was their mission statement. It was the absolute why behind the immense existential risk they were taking.
I literally have chills. Picture that. Reading those axioms, all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, rolling that text out loud to a crew of freezing, terrified, adrenaline-filled sailors on the pitching deck of a ship in the middle of the Atlantic.
It completely changes the context of the document.
That is so powerful. It elevates the document from a piece of legal paperwork to a survival mechanism. And it makes this newly discovered document absolutely priceless.
It's going into a museum exhibition called Revolution 250 in the UK.
Which is amazing. But since the source material is fundamentally aimed at founders, investors, and business minds, it pivots to ask a very indelicate but absolutely fascinating question.
The market value.
Right. What is an original first edition announcement of a country actually worth on the open market?
The economics of these foundational documents are staggering.
I can imagine.
Early copies of the Declaration, particularly the Dunlap broadsides and these early local printings, are among the most valuable printed documents on Earth.
Because they're so rare.
Yes. And the pricing dynamics are fascinating because they are driven by extreme scarcity, the provenance, which is the documented story of who owned it, and the fact that the value is almost entirely based on narrative.
Let's talk about the greatest attic find in the history of American collecting, because I am obsessed with this story.
It's a legendary story.
In 1989, a guy is at a flea market in Adamstown, Pennsylvania. He sees a torn, ugly painting, but he really likes the wooden frame it's in.
Just wants the frame.
Right. So he pays $4 for it. He takes it home, pops the painting out of the frame, and folded up behind the canvas is an original 1776 Dunlap broadside.
It is the dream of every person who has ever gone to a garage sale.
Unbelievable luck.
From a $4 flea market find to the auction block. In 1991, that specific document sold at Sotheby's for $2.42 million.
That is an astronomical return on investment, $4 to $2.4 million.
Quite the markup.
But wait, pause. How does a historical document just sit behind a flea market painting for 200 years? And more importantly, how do appraisers even authenticate something like that to justify a $2.5 million price tag? People fake old documents all the time.
They do, but authentication at that level is a rigorous science. Appraisers don't just look at the words.
What do they look at?
They analyze the physical paper itself. They look for laid paper with specific chain lines and watermarks that match 18th century paper mills.
Oh, so they can date the actual fibers.
Exactly. They analyze the typography, the specific cast of the metal type, the spacing, the unique broken letters that match John Dunlap's printing press in Philadelphia on that exact night.
Like a forensic fingerprint.
Exactly. Once it passes those physical tests, it becomes an undeniable artifact. And the value just kept climbing.
How high did it go?
By the year 2000, that exact same document resold for $8.14 million.
$8 million.
To television producer Norman Lear and internet executive David Hayden. They then toured it around the country in a custom-built case.
That's incredible.
The provenance and the massive publicity actually compounded its value.
And the market is still red hot today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Just this past January, in 2026, Christie's auctioned off a different early Broadside copy. This one had been passed down through a New Hampshire family since the 1980s.
And what did that sell for?
It sold for $5.687 million. The source points out that anniversary years, like the semi-quincentennial we're celebrating, create a massive spike in market attention and bids.
It is a classic supply shock scenario, but with virtually zero float.
What do you mean?
Well, when that 11th Exeter copy was unveiled in London yesterday, it didn't enter the open market. It went directly into a national collection.
Right, nobody can buy it.
So the total supply of purchasable copies didn't increase at all, but the global awareness of them did.
I'm going to bring back the ELI 5 analogy here because it is the only way my brain can process someone paying $8 million for a piece of old paper.
Go for it.
Imagine there are only 26 copies of the very first Pokemon card ever printed in existence.
Okay.
But instead of just being a rare toy, each of those cards was physically present in the room during a world-changing historical event. Museums want them, billionaires want them, entire countries want them.
The demand is infinite.
And the factory that printed them burned down 250 years ago. No one can ever print a real 1776 Broadside again. The scarcity is absolute.
That is exactly the dynamic. Buyers aren't paying for the ink and the paper. They're pricing the absolute scarcity.
They're buying the artifact.
They are pricing the story of the document itself. And on a deeper cultural level, they're pricing the country's continued enduring interest in its own founding narrative.
But why do modern tech billionaires and investors care so much about this old paper? What is a psychological connection there?
That's the million-dollar question.
Or the $8 million question. That continued interest in the founding story is exactly what historian Arthur Herman tackles in his new book, published this past April 2026, called Founders Fire, From 1776 to the Age of Trump.
The source material uses this book as a through line.
Yeah, to explore whether the DNA of 1776 defines every subsequent generation of America.
Herman's central thesis is that America is fundamentally a founder nation.
A founder nation?
He argues that the country is propelled forward generation after generation, not by cautious bureaucrats, but by visionary risk-takers who refuse to accept inherited stagnation.
Okay, so it's a cyclical thing.
Instead of trying to slowly reform a broken system, these founders rebuild from first principles.
And he views 1776 as the original ultimate template for this. Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, they didn't just want better tax rates from the British system. They questioned the foundational premises of a monarchy and shipped a total replacement.
Exactly.
Herman argues that every major wave of American history, from Abraham Lincoln to the Gilded Age industrialists like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, all the way to modern tech founders like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, is just a recapitulation of that original 1776 founding gesture.
They are all tapping into the exact same founder's fire.
That's his argument.
He relies heavily on a concept very similar to Joseph Schumpeter's economic theory of creative destruction, but he casts it with biographical heroes.
Great man theory, essentially.
Right. Herman posits a historical cycle. Founders create and disrupt. Then managers take over.
And what do the managers do?
These managers consolidate, systematize, and eventually ossify what the founders built. That system eventually stagnates under its own weight, which then summons the next generation of founders to disrupt it all over again.
It's a very compelling narrative, especially for the entrepreneurial audience reading this material.
It resonates perfectly with Silicon Valley.
In fact, the source includes this amazing, satirical, but completely sincere pitch deck for USA Inc.
I saw that.
It treats the founding fathers like a literal executive team. George Washington is the CEO, Thomas Jefferson is the chief product officer, Franklin is chief strategy officer.
The pitch deck maps perfectly onto venture capital reasoning. The problem statement is an incumbent monopoly, the distant monarchy with no accountability and no voice for the users. The solution is a new governance platform where power resides with the people. The operating system is the U.S. Constitution, and the early metrics are 13 founding partner colonies incorporated in 1776.
It's hilarious, but it genuinely makes you look at the historical text differently.
It does.
The case for Herman's book is that the Declaration actually reads like a venture pitch. It doesn't start with whining about taxes, it starts with axioms. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It starts with first principles.
And the founders took catastrophic personal risks.
Massive risk.
That closing line of the Declaration, pledging our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, that wasn't a cute metaphor for a boardroom.
Yeah.
If they lost the war, they were going to be physically hanged for treason.
It was an existential risk.
Yeah.
However, the analysis is very careful to present the strongest critiques of Herman's thesis as well, and we must be equally objective in reporting them.
Absolutely.
Critics of this kind of great man history argue that the founder framing systematically underweights massive structural forces.
Which is a valid critique.
Right. I mean, I have to push back on Herman's framing a bit here, too, just based on the text. Jefferson's beautiful prose wouldn't have mattered at all without the 13 massive colonial legislatures and the thousands of committee members that backed it up logistically.
The managers in Herman's.
Exactly. Or the fact that the American startup would have absolutely undeniably failed in the B round if the French Navy hadn't shown up to help win the war at Yorktown. You can't just attribute all of that to a few visionary founders.
Exactly. The geopolitical reality of the French alliance was the structural capital that kept the enterprise afloat.
It wasn't just scrappy ingenuity.
No. Furthermore, as we discussed with the brutal editing process, the Declaration was a team effort. Congress's cuts, while painful to Jefferson, arguably made the document punchier and more effective as a piece of propaganda, though, again, tragically compromised regarding the protection of slavery.
The technical debt.
Right. The critics point out that this shows how managers and editors often co-author the very things that the solitary founders end up getting all the credit for.
The critics also point out that Herman's label of founder can get dangerously unfalsifiable.
How do you mean?
Well, if you stretch the definition of a founder to include everyone from George Washington to Martin Luther King Jr. to Donald Trump, it risks becoming just a flattering label you stick on whoever happened to win a political fight or disrupt the status quo.
A catch-all term.
Right, without a clear way to distinguish between a disruption that builds durable, lasting institutions and a disruption that just breaks things for the sake of breaking them.
That is the core historiographical debate. Do individuals shape history, or do massive structural forces push individuals to the front of the stage?
It's the eternal question.
The verdict is left open on this debate in the newsletter. But what is concluded is that whatever theory of history you prefer, the physical paper trail of the Declaration shows all of it happening simultaneously.
All the layers at once.
It was a brilliant individual authorship by Jefferson, collective, messy editing by the committee, rigid institutional procedure by the Congress, and massive decentralized distribution by the printers, all operating at once.
But the way the story of the founding generation ends, you can't blame people for believing in the myth of the great founders when you look at how they exited.
The timing is uncanny.
We have to talk about the ultimate founder's exit. We talked earlier about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. They worked together on the drafting committee. They respected each other.
But then they became fierce, bitter political rivals in the early days of the Republic, leading opposing political parties.
Exactly. And then eventually, in their extreme old age, they reconciled and became prolific pen pals, writing these incredible letters back and forth about history and philosophy.
It is a truly complex, lifelong relationship that practically defined the intellectual contours of the new nation.
So, cut to exactly 50 years after the adoption of the Declaration is July 4th, 1826, the 50th golden anniversary of the nation. On that exact day, within hours of each other, both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams die.
It is one of the most astonishing, statistically improbable coincidences in recorded history.
It's insane.
And to add to the cinematic nature of it, Adams' reported last words in Massachusetts were, "Thomas Jefferson survives."
Wow.
He was wrong by about 5 hours. Jefferson had passed away earlier that same day down in Virginia. Though the exact wording of his last breath is debated by historians, the timing of their deaths on the exact 50th anniversary is an established fact.
And if that wasn't wild enough, James Monroe, the 5th president and another giant of the Revolutionary era, died exactly 5 years later on July 4, 1831.
Another one.
3 of the first 5 presidents of the United States exited on the company's exact founding day. It is a statistical curiosity that no screenwriter would ever dare to invent because the audience would reject it as too unbelievable.
It serves as a poetic, almost mythic capstone to the story of the founding generation. They were inextricably physically tied to that date, to that piece of paper, and to the massive, improbable launch they orchestrated.
Which brings us to the end of our deep dive and back to you listening right now. We've talked about 14-month product launches under fire, brutal peer reviews that compromised the nation's soul, ships captured in the freezing Atlantic, and $4 flea market frames hiding millions of dollars. But what does a 250-year-old document mean for us tomorrow as the fireworks go off?
The material we review today ends with a list of self-reflection questions for leaders, but one in particular stands out as a powerful way to synthesize everything we've discussed about building, scaling, and maintaining complex systems.
I completely agree. Look around at our society. Which parts of it feel like beautifully maintained core code that is still running flawlessly? And which parts feel like technical debt just waiting for a new founder's refactor? It's something for you to mull over tomorrow when you look up at the sky.
Led by Jack Russo, Computer Law Group LLP is a bespoke business litigation and founder-friendly boutique law firm with offices and licensed attorneys in Silicon Valley, New York, and Tampa Bay. And you can reach Jack at computerlaw.com and his team at www.computerlaw.com, where the newsletter we refer to is published in detail and readily available, commitment-free with no paywalls or other charges.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.